Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian from the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, and we are in Pringle Hall. And for anybody who's a student of naval history knows how important Pringle Hall is. It was the home of wargaming. In fact, the Naval War College is one of the places where wargaming as we know it today was pioneered. And we're honored to have with us as our guest a strategist and a historian and a wargamer in Captain Rick LaBranche, who is the chairman of the wargaming department here. Sir, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, sir. Glad to be here.
Let me ask you, you just took over the department of wargaming here, and obviously this is a historic room, interwar period, a lot of wargaming that looked at how America's potential naval adversaries would respond. The group here figured out almost everything that the Japanese would do in a war, with the exception of kamikaze attacks. And of course, this room was also used throughout the war itself to iteratively war game new scenarios and things on all fronts that we saw, whether there were submarine issues or others. Tell us a little bit about how wargaming has evolved from when it was effectively born here in the late 1800s.
Wargaming I think, became the most useful during the interwar years, as you suggested, because there was a demand signal for it, and because the War College used to be a place where the high-ranking officers used to come to get an education and actually learn how to be better warfighters at sea. And so that has continued to this day. However, obviously the Navy's getting bigger. The world is getting smaller, if you will. It's more globalized, and so there's a lot more. As the environment changes, it changes in many ways. So I think the strength in wargaming, obviously, is being able to simulate an environment, a changing environment, to provide workable solutions, or at least explore a wicked problem, what we call a wicked problem, or a complex adaptive system. Mm-hmm. You may think you're touching one thing when you make an action, and 30 things may change. So what a war game does, it combines the entire environment, but it's only as good as the people that are playing it, you see. And so how it has evolved is in ways where we need a lot more subject matter experts in. It's not merely kinetics with ships. Now you have cyber. You have space. You have satellites. So as the potential environment changes, you have to have subject matter experts in all these areas in order to fully explore large, complex problems. Does that make sense? Plus the technology has changed as well.
And obviously, right, you're no longer moving, and for folks who don't know what's under this carpeted, I mean, right now this is the International Lounge for the Naval War College for the international students, but there's a checkerboard floor, and people used to move models around the floor, and now you have a state-of-the-art, highly secure, computerized battle management center where the cells, are a much more real-time, much more data-rich environment that you're dealing with. There was a lot of history that was written here. Yes, do you feel that the wargaming you're doing now at the War College is going to be something that 50 years from now, and God forbid, if there is a conflict, that when folks write the book 50 years from now, they'll say, boy, that team really gamed some of the right scenarios, that we were prepared because we had insights into whether it was a hybrid complex operation or whether it was a fully kinetic peer-on-peer, that those guys really got it. Do you feel that you guys are doing that kind of work today that decades from now people will look back on?
I hope so. If we do it right, the answer is yes. I think the interwar years, if I'm going to back up and I'll say why they were so useful, is because we knew what the environment was, and we were pinpointed on it. Okay, we need to know X, whether it's the South China Sea with regard to the Japanese at the time, or the Solomon Islands, or what have you. We knew what the problem was. And so we could expand on the problem and iterate and and play it over and over and over again and find the gaps and seams and what we had, what we could do, what we shouldn't do, right? Now it's not as easy, right? We we have to, who has the questions that need to be answered? So we have people here deriving questions, right? What are the problems? So what we need is and what I think is very difficult is a linkage, and we recently have reestablished a linkage with leadership, high leadership. What is making your head hurt? What are the problems? Where do you think we need to be focusing our efforts? Because we're over here thinking this is where we need to be focusing our efforts, whether it's the South China Sea, whether it's wherever we think there might be a potential issue, if you will, whether it's cyber. There's a plethora of potential problems out there, and a very constrained or finite amount of time and space that we can use. So what do you think you being leadership, think we should be working on? What are the problems? We can answer questions, right? But we have to what are the questions that need to be answered? And then we bring in the subject matter experts, because the way you design a war game is about the same as you designed it back then. What is your task? Who is your sponsor? So that's the question. How do we design a war game that answers that question? And then how do we develop, put into play, who do we bring in to make sure that when we collect data, that data gets us to the questions? And what tools are we using, right? And how do we test the war game before the players get here? Because their time is extremely valuable. And then we do a rehearsal, and then we execute, and then we grab all that data and we analyze it. And then we come up with conclusions and then possibly recommendations. So that format, that construct, is about the same as it's always been. In the interwar years, there was a lot of very tactical things, and we still do tactical things here, right, in CNWS. But we have been focusing heavily on operational and strategic issues as well, and maritime issues. Not only maritime issues, but that's been our focal point. But it's very important to get the questions right. What are the questions? What are the problems that need to be answered? There's so many these days. That's really the issue.
You could be working 24/7 on trying to do all the different modeling on it. If I can take you to in World War II, as you also, during World War II, there was a lot of feedback from the fleet. Whenever there was a new problem, folks here would get to work on that new problem, try to break it down into component parts. Okay, here's the challenge, here's the problem, let's try to find some solutions to it. And so there was a lot of interaction between what the fleet and the force needed and vice versa between the folks here. In fact, there were instances where folks were coming from forward over here, hey look, this is the situation, this is what we're facing, let's play that game. Do you have that kind of connectivity now with the guys who are further down the chain and command to together work to be like, hey look, this is what we're seeing out there, right? Whether it's a little blue man problem or anything else, to be able to sort of work some of those solutions and then to also be able to push some solutions down into the force?
That's a great question. I wasn't around during World War II. I can only read, I can only assume that the conduits were there because, as you said, the warfighters actually came here. They came here and then went right back out to warfighting. So we have a looser connection right now. A lot of the warfighters, I was a warfighter before I came here. I was an air wing commander, right? 3 years ago, I was leading an air wing at sea on an aircraft carrier. And so that's how we get a lot of our warfighters questions. That's the guys that bring the stuff over here and say, listen, I was out there and this is what made my head hurt. These are the questions I have, and that is a mechanism. We also have the naval flag officers that come here, and we ask them, hey, what do you think about X? What do you think about Y? Admiral Swift is a huge proponent of wargaming. He sees the value in it, and like many flag officers, see the value in it right now. And I think it's not a function of like, okay, wargaming waned since the interwar years, and now it's back in vogue. I think, and this is one guy, right? This is a personal opinion, but I think it's because Now, we've always wargamed. We haven't wargamed with any less rigor, any less energy, but
it has had a renaissance, right?
It,
Bob Work, the
right,
Deputy Secretary, is a big proponent of
yes,
wargaming.
it has had a renaissance, and I think that renaissance is because because the nature of the environment today with regard to the when I'm talking about the maritime environment, okay, and many others, but for me, I'm focusing on the maritime environment. Since World War II, I'm of the opinion that mostly the United States, or at least since the 60s, almost 40 years, maybe 50 years, the United States Navy has enjoyed command of the seas, okay? Well, I'm not going to say sea control, because the term sea control today connotes an adversary, that the water's contested. I would say mostly, this is a gross generalization, but mostly, wherever the U.S. Navy has operated, not a lot of contestation.
Right.
So
it's been a generally permissive environment where
yes,
the United States could go
right,
where it wanted, when it wanted
right. So presence became this idea that as long as we have a ship there, we have sea control, which is wrong, because a permissive environment is not sea control. So if two generations, and maybe 2.5 generations of sailors have lived like, for example, I'm here, I'm present, that is a deterrent because I'm here, then maybe we've moved away from the idea that sea control must be achieved. And so now, if the environment is changing where we have near-peer competitors or peer competitors or potential adversaries where we don't have command of the seas and maybe never will, what does the environment look like? And now we're coming back to the well saying, well, you know, we could use some help on this. What do you guys think? And so we put our best minds together to come up with the best questions to ask and find the gaps in the seams in equipment, in thought, in who might be an adversary, where might this take place, and it's all speculative. Mm-hmm. But that's what we're talking about, because war games, they don't predict. War games don't predict, but they anticipate, because all these people get together, and when you have a red cell, your potential adversary cell, you have to be very careful about who you choose. They have to know whoever we're playing as the adversary, their culture, the way they think. That's why Nimitz didn't anticipate the kamikazes, because our culture couldn't wrap our mind around that. It's different culture, different way of thinking. We would never have done that, so we couldn't have thought that way. That's an example of why thinking like your potential adversary is so important. You know, getting that cultural mix inside there and understanding, our red cell needs to understand what capacities they have, how they organize, and how they fight. So you can't take a bunch of blue players, put them in a red cell with red stuff and let them go, because they're going to fight the red stuff like they would fight the blue stuff.
Right.
Can't do that. So a lot of cogitation takes place, a lot of mental activity takes place.
But it was two things. I mean, thing number one is that the United States Army, when it comes to the opposition force at the National Training Center, had an extremely dedicated OPFOR. And while it would use much of the same Soviet equipment, or Warsaw Pact equipment, they were guys whose job it was to live as the OPFOR. And so it became the nemesis of every ground guy who would go to the National Training Center, because they were that good, where you got, even though you thought you were good, it was deliberately designed to become a humbling experience for you to go, boy, you thought you were the best of the best, and you came in and you got your stuff yanked. So do we need to get into an environment when it comes to wargaming and training where even the best and brightest come here and elsewhere in the fleet and the force and are sort of walk away going like, man, I did not see that coming, as a little bit of a humbling experience, because ultimately, look, the U.S. Air Force faces this to a degree also, right? It has operated as supreme, most powerful Air Force uncontested. You could say the last time the U.S. Navy really traded steel in any significant way was in World War II.
Significantly correct. what we're doing, we are doing that. I mean, we have war games, and there's a lot of flag officer participation in these war games. And sometimes there's do-overs, where things happen that weren't anticipated because of time, space, force, because maybe of a lack of understanding of capabilities. That's going away because our flag force, our senior leadership, is really getting their arms around the fact that we don't have the same advantage that we used to have, technological advantage, okay? And there's a lot more data that goes into it, right? So, for example, there's a lot of data, right? And how do we capture data? It used to be war games, you'd find out, well, how did you actually collect the data of what took place? Because you're looking for decision points so you can explore those areas, maybe do them over again and say, because in a war game, you can make a mistake and only synthetic ships sink, only synthetic people die. If you try that in real life, I think we're risk averse to that, right? And so what will happen is we will set them up and let them learn, and then maybe, and that's the value of the iterative process, like they did back in the day, back in the interwar years. But what we have an advantage today is, although we have a lot more domains to worry about, you understand what I'm saying? Air, surface, undersurface, cyber, those types of things, even though maybe cyber's not quite a domain yet, the physical domains, information. We have better tools, like we have qualitative analysis tools that they didn't have back in the day, and computing that help us get our arms around complex problems. Atlas TI, Analyst Notebook, qualitative, big data type of things that tell us maybe there were hidden messages inside the data we collected. Very good. Quantitative, SPSS tools, linear regression type of tools that they didn't have back then. It was a bunch of guys that went through this and said, hey, what did we learn? And why did you do that? And people keeping notes and so on and so forth. But now we go the extra step. Even though there's a lot more data, we take a lot of surveys. During steps, there's data collections in between. So it's not just we run the war game. Hey, what happened? No, we're collecting data throughout the war game, so that we can analyze that data. So you may leave here thinking X, but when the game report comes out, the answer may have been, or the conclusion may have been X plus Y, so on and so forth. So that's how things have changed, and we are connecting with the fleet in the last 3 years. The Secretary's letter was propitious, because what interests your boss fascinates you, but we were there. In fact, I would like to think that we would lead turn. We had a lead, there's an aviation parlance. We had a lead turn on that, which was good.
Let me take you to two quick questions. Question number one is, how are you interacting with the war gamers, in the Army, in the Marine Corps, as well as in the Air Force, as you try to figure out the best concepts, the best ways, the best technology, the best modes of thinking when it comes to crafting future war games?
Well, I think most wargaming institutions think they're the best. We've been doing this formally since 1887, right? We started putting it together in 1885-ish, but in 1887 we hung a shingle.
Which is extraordinary.
Which is extraordinary. But we're not the first to do it. We're just the first to officially hang a shingle and say we were doing it. The Germans did it. There's a history of wargaming. So we did it mostly informally, right? And as you know, the services used to be stovepiped back in 20, 30, 40 years ago. Not so much anymore. So, for example, and it's becoming more commonplace, we're having the Army Wargaming, I think they call him the director. He'll be here in October. The Marine Corps Wargaming lead will be coming out here in earlier October. So there's a lot more overt type of cross-pollination, if you will. Very important. If for some reason, we think we do it well because we have the pros of Dover. We set up departments outside of wargaming to be specialists in certain areas for certain regions of the world, as you probably already know. You know, we have region X, region Y, region Z, and so on and so forth. And we have a cell of PhDs and very smart people about those areas that continually dig and get information to be smart in these certain areas. Well, and then we have all these analytical tools to try to stay ahead of the curve on, you know, gathering big data and so on and so forth. But we have more formally and more iteratively are starting to liaison with the other departments, say, make sure that we, you know, if they've got great ideas, let's have it. Because remember, the Army is looking at it from a land domain, the Air Force is looking at it from an air domain, the Marine Corps is looking at it from an amphibious domain. We're looking at it from many domains because we have undersea, surface, and, you know, the littorals is land and air. So I think collaboration, I always think collaboration is good.
And one last brief question. So you guys also relived the Jutland war game, and you guys found some of the old models. Battle of Jutland, obviously in 1916, between the Royal Navy and the Imperial German High Fleet, and you guys recreated it in this room.
Yes, and it went so well because it wasn't just wargamers. Wargamers facilitated, kind of did the grunt work, the heavy lifting to get to prepare it, adjudication, move sheets, but we opened it to the entire college. And so people came in, and different people had different ships. We showed them how they were supposed to move, and if they made a mistake, you know, if they meant to go left and went right, it was very interesting, and people really got into it. Now that's a tactical game and very historical, but people were excited about it because it's a learning event. And for people who thought they knew the Jutland, what happened during that time, I think everyone walked away a little bit smarter about it, how difficult it was, and it went so well that we recreated the same thing as for an elective, and they just ran it, and the students love it as well. So it's anything you can do to help people operationalize information. That's what it does, right? Instead of just reading a book and memorizing a bunch of stuff, you're living it. You're part of it. You are Admiral so-and-so. So you remember these things.
That's right. You remember that there were guys named Beatty and Shear and Hipper. And,
absolutely.
Sir, thanks very, very much. Really enjoyed talking to you.
No, it was my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.